Megan, welcome to the show. Congratulations on the book. I mean, this thing has rocketed up the charts in an amazing way. And I think it really speaks to what an important issue it is, but also the work that you've done to expose what's going on.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And it has. And I think it is because it confirmed what so many evangelicals, so many evangelical voters suspected was happening in their churches and ministries, but they didn't have the evidence for it. So now when they wonder, why is my pastor insisting that we need to, say, oppose the Trump administration's border policies, but support the Biden administration's policies, they're starting to get an understanding of where that's coming from and what money and what influences are driving it.
Well, I want to get to a lot of that because I think it's fascinating to me. And it's something that I've been wondering about for a while. And suddenly your book came out and I was like, this now makes so much sense. But talk about fortuitous. This morning, David Brody put out a brand new ad that's coming out from the Harris team on this. I want to play you what they're saying about religion and how they're going at this. So let's take a look at the ad.
Have you been to the cross and said, Lord, I have sinned. I'm sorry for my sin. I'm willing to change my way of life.
Have you ever asked God for forgiveness? That's a tough question. I'm not sure I have. I don't bring God into that picture. I don't.
All right, so you can see it there. Evangelicals for Harris really trying to put this issue of forgiveness front and center, trying to make Donald Trump look like, or at least undermine his relationship with God. What do you think they're trying to do here?
Well, look, I'm not going to pretend that Donald Trump has evidenced any deep theological or doctrinal understanding. He's not a pastor, he's a politician. And so I find this particular commercial really telling, coming from a campaign that is diametrically opposed to biblical morality in so many ways. But what it does show is how important they recognize that evangelical voting bloc is. So for those who may not be aware, evangelicals are roughly 30% of the electorate. Even left-leaning legacy outlets like The Atlantic have called them America's most powerful voting bloc. And there is some evidence that in 2020, the Evangelicals for Biden gambit, which kind of ran this same play, was somewhat successful at swinging not a lot of evangelical votes, but just enough in a couple of key swing states that it put Biden over that, let's say, margin of cheating or margin of rigging certain early voting options. So when we look at that, we can see that they thought, okay, that was an important component of it. It gave Biden just enough votes in those states. So we need to run that play again. And it was key there that you saw Billy Graham, because Billy Graham's granddaughter has been one of the people running point on this Evangelicals for Harris. But what all of this stems from are secular left-wing funders who have been driving policies like this into evangelical ministries. So if we look at Evangelicals for Harris, I can tell you specifically, Christianity Today's board chairman is on that Evangelicals for Harris team. He's speaking at an event. Now, that's something that Christianity Today probably wouldn't broadly want people to know because they purport to be biblical on matters of sexuality, gender, marriage, sanctity of life. And yet, here's who they're partnering with. You dig a little deeper and you find that this is not unusual for Christianity Today. They take a lot of secular left-wing funding. They have a lot of staffers who donate to Democrats, including their editorial and news staff. So this is par for the course of what is happening with this leftist infiltration into evangelical spaces and ministries.
You hit on the word secular. I want to bring that back up in a minute because I think you're putting your finger on something that I have been talking to friends about for a while, and I want to get your take on it. But I want to go back to the tweet that David Brody put out when he issued this ad, because it touches on exactly what you're saying. It says this is not just a play for liberal Christians. The group already has over 200,000 evangelical Christians who have signed a pledge to volunteer and vote for the Harris Walz ticket. Big Zoom call tonight, FYI, that's later tonight. They ain't playing. Look, here's a reality check. This is Brody writing. Donald Trump will get a hefty majority of the conservative evangelical vote. That's a no-brainer. But if you think of an effort like this is laughable and a waste of time, you're missing the larger political point. Elections are typically won at the margins, especially in the 7 key swing states. And so with that in mind, consider this. And this goes to your point. In 2008, Barack Obama received 26% of the white born-again evangelical vote and won. In 2016, Hillary Clinton received 16% of the born evangelical vote and lost. In 2020, Joe Biden received 24% of the white born-again evangelical vote and won. If Kamala Harris gets 20% or more of the white born-again evangelical vote, not out of the question, Trump will probably lose. That's David Brody writing that. Do you agree with his assessment?
Yeah, I do. I very much agree with his assessment. And more importantly, I know that the secular left funders of so many of these efforts also agree with it. And that's why they have been really turning their position in the last 10 years from opposing evangelical Christians to figuring out how they can co-opt them, and even failing that, at least suppress that vote. So they don't necessarily have to get these voters to swing to Harris. They can just get them to stay home because they are demoralized or they feel that there are no good choices here. And so that's also a part of this effort. And look, you've seen them do this not just on these candidates, but also on specific policies. You have people like George Soros who have funded groups like the Evangelical Immigration Table to oppose Donald Trump's fairly reasonable border policies and pretend that they are extreme, beyond the pale, unbiblical. In one case, a high-profile SBC leader, which is the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant denomination in the U.S., tweeted out that they were wicked. Well, these efforts are actually being funded by secular left funders like George Soros, and that is what the people in the pews don't know. All they see is their leadership saying, this policy, this border policy, this remain in Mexico policy is wicked and evil. And they don't know that this pastor is actually involved with a secular left funded group to say these things.
And so how does that relationship work? What did you uncover in writing this book? Like, is it that they get a call one day and says, hi, I'm George Soros or his affiliate. I've got a bunch of cash, but I need you to say the following. Like, how do they infiltrate churches and denominations?
Right. It's not quite that explicitly transactional, but it's not far off. So what we saw, for example, when we look at immigration, one of the most important issues to voters is that a secular group called the National Immigration Forum that was funded largely by Soros when it was founded, and now by a number of other secular left funders as well, they formed a front group, the Evangelical Immigration Table. Legally, there was no separation between these two entities. It was under the umbrella of the secular left National Immigration Forum. And then what they did is they bring in a host of recognized and trusted evangelical institutions like Christianity Today, like the National Association of Evangelicals, which represents some 45,000 churches in dozens of denominations. And these entities are trusted because in the past they were conservative. For example, the National Association of Evangelicals hosted Ronald Reagan in 1983, and that is where he gave his famous Evil Empire speech. So that is why so many people tend to trust them, because they don't know that these institutions have drifted far left over time, and they are now taking money from people that none of these evangelicals in the pews would agree with if they knew about it. So what they do then is they fund these efforts. They hire pastors, they hire leadership to run these organizations who are also working with groups like the National Association of Evangelicals. And then they put out these talking points. They write letters to lawmakers, to GOP lawmakers in the name of evangelicals saying, we want you to back Biden's border policy. We want the Biden administration to turn over and shut down Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, even though it was very popular with the evangelical base. So these things are done in their name.
I want to get back to this idea of secularism, because as I said, it's been something that I've been talking about with friends of mine for at least 3 or 4 years now. And the reason I want to get your take on this is that what amazed me is the left, in terms of our society and culture, hijack stuff where I want to identify as this. And so you must use my pronouns to recognize me or whatever. I'm sure I'm butchering some of their talking points here. But if you're religious and you say, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, I'm an evangelical, and I believe the following, then instead of you having to recognize or accept me, it's okay for you to demonize me. That this idea of not allowing someone to basically practice their religion, even acknowledge it. Like I couldn't, say, respectfully as a Catholic, I don't acknowledge that, or the Bible teaches us this, to now would be offensive, hate speech. And so they have pushed out the ability of people to discuss or practice or acknowledge their own religion.
No, that's absolutely true. And that's why there's such a sharp irony in what we're seeing come out of the Harris campaign right now. We have specifically seen them suppress Catholic news organizations, that people like David Daleiden that were trying to get out important reporting on what was going on with Planned Parenthood and the traffic in aborted fetal tissue and organs. And so they are now trying to pretend like Kamala Harris, Tim Walz are people of faith when they have in no way demonstrated that over time. You look at Kamala Harris, and she is someone who has specifically targeted religious people. You look at Tim Walz, and there's nothing in his record that demonstrates a holistic Christian understanding of ethics when it comes to so many issues that are so important to Christians. And yet you see the media just now, this wasn't something they were trying to do before the election, trying to play this game of repainting them as suddenly religious in some significant way. Just this week, I saw numerous secular media outlets referring to Tim Walz as a Minnesota Lutheran. Well, that's very ridiculous. We've never really seen any evidence that Tim Walz is particularly involved in even his very liberal mainline faith. And Kamala Harris has never spoken with any sincerity about her Christian faith. And yet that's what they're doing. They're trying to take these people who have for so long targeted Christians and now say they're one of us in order to try to secure those votes. But what you know is that as soon as the election is over, if they are successful, they will go right back to targeting Christians and trying to force them to act against their religious impulses and against their religious consciences.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.